Okay. Maybe we can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Welcome to the DMM working group meeting. Before the meeting, let's show some note well. I think everyone should know that, be aware of that. And before the meeting, please sign up the blue sheet. Yes. And does anyone volunteer to take the meeting minutes? Please volunteer to take the meeting minutes. Otherwise, we cannot start the meeting.
So nobody's looking at the projector. Yeah.
How about Marco? Can you take the meeting minutes? Okay, thank you. Yeah. So if anyone in the Jabber, you can also help to monitor the questions. Okay, here is the agenda. So we have only one session for this time. And here is the very quick summary of the current status of the document we have currently in the working group. So we have actually totally 8 working group documents, and 4 of them is related to DMM, which is focused on distributed mobility management, and the other 4 is the is mobile IP related maintenance work. So for the DMM document, we have this 4 working group document. The first one is on-demand mobility. We got a latest version on January 29, but we haven't issued a working group. Let's call for this, right? And the second one, DMM deployment model, that is a 0.1 version, and we got the latest update on February 21st. Is also haven't been issued working group last call. The third one is DMM FPC CPTP document, that is in 0.7 version. I think the working group has spent a lot of discussions on this, and we got the latest version on just recently on March 13. The last one is distributed mobility anchor, and we got 0.3 version. Yeah, the next page is the IPv6 maintenance work. So some of the document is in IESG evaluation, and the last one we still need to update from the author. Yeah. Okay, that's the current status.
Yes, Suresh.
Suresh Krishnan. So the first document, the 4283 MNIDs, so that is really completely stuck. Okay, so it's not going to move until the working group actually comments on it. Okay, so if you haven't been following, this document defines like a lot of persistent MNIDs that get passed on further in the network. And like if after like, a lot of the ADs, the security ADs and ART ADs, like they are really concerned about the privacy leaks because of this, and whether all these need to be encrypted or not. So I think this document is like really has like too many types and we don't know how useful they are. And unless the working group comments on like which of these are essential and which of these need to be protected, it's not going anywhere. So it's just going to sit there, and I don't want it to sit there. So I really like put some deadline, whatever like chairs think fit, like let's say a month or so. If like there's no comments on this, the document is getting returned back here.
So Suresh, how do we move forward on this, right? Question, when the work got started, there was feedback from the working group saying that there has to be support from other access technologies. Based on that feedback, the authors, worked on it, put in a lot of efforts, and they came out with this extensive set of, identifiers. Now the question is the concern for the IESG, is it that this lack of security text, or is it more that, why do you need all of this, get rid of most of that? Which one is?
both.
It's both.
It's both,
Mhm.
right? And it's sad truth, right? But this is an IETF, right? Like stuff takes a lot of time, and then people lose interest, change things, and go away. And it has happened quite a bit. And there's been documents where I've been author on, which got dropped after 3 years of hard work, or 5 years of hard work, or whatever. And it is very, very difficult, but unless there's some kind of guidance coming from the working group. And I think it's Charlie has been trying hard, and you've been trying hard, but you do need to find this or trim down. So
Right.
I think if nothing happens, right, my suggestion would be to trim down the stuff to what is essential, and then encrypt everything. That would really satisfy the ASG at this point. But the question is, will the document be useful? But that's your call as chair and authors to figure out if that's something that would be useful.
Right. So Charlie, welcome. So what is your, any comments from you as a lead author on this?
Well, I'm sure Suresh mentioned that we're still waiting for some people to make comments on the value for having the additional kinds of mobile ID types. And I think that some of them are clearly useful. Some of them were added by request. And so the people that requested them, I think, should further support the inclusion of those types. It was, I have to say, a lot of work to go through, to do to fashion all that text, but that's life. And if it doesn't get any support, then I'm okay with taking it out and progressing the document.
Mm-hmm. So how do you decide what to keep, what to get rid of, Charlie, and on what basis? What is your consideration?
Well, I think it depends on if they have if it adds value to include those kinds of identifiers, and if it enables more natural presentation of the identifier for use in the mobile IP. Basically, that's what the point of doing it was. And so, I don't know
But I guess
question?
my question is, how do we decide, what to keep, what to get rid of, what all identifiers to keep, what all to get rid of, right? Should we as working group for additional feedback, or I haven't seen much, any feedback from the working group on that.
Yeah, I think that's what we need is feedback from the working group and the members specifically that propose the inclusion of those types.
They have to comment. Okay. All right. Okay. Next.
So Sri, Suresh Krishnan again. So you're taking an action to put
Yes.
some deadline, let's say a month from now or whatever, and say, okay, these are the things we want to keep or not. Because for example, the more numbers that are in there, it's harder for me to justify that these are required. For example, RFID and mobile IP, really, come on, there's no way I can justify it. It's why do you need RFID identifiers for mobile IP? It's something that I cannot justify. So whatever's in there, I need to be able to justify, and I cannot at this point. Okay, so as long as I get the ammunition to say why it's useful, right? One example might be 3GPP is using something, 3GPP2 was using something, right? And so on. It's a real use case, or for wireless LAN, somebody's using PMIP for this, and we can do that. Those are all making sense. RFID, I don't know,
Okay.
right? How you can't even come up with a plausible use case for that, right? So that if I can have some support to why it's needed, some deployment, somebody wants to use it, somebody wants to support this, it's something I can justify. Otherwise, I cannot.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh. I think I did trigger some discussions on the mailing list, and probably will set a deadline and take it from there. Okay. Next.
We can just go to the presentation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's begin our first presentation. For this is the FPC work, right? I think Marco is, I guess, is going to do the presentation. Yeah. Yeah. Any other volunteers, please? We need somebody to take notes.
Alex, how about can you help to take minutes?
Yeah. Just 1 second.
Anyway, that's just you still can
Yeah.
Use this. Yeah.
brief update on the FTC work, which is currently available for version 7. Brief background what this is about. Just as a reminder, what we're doing here is doing a clear separation between mobile data control and data plane, specifying protocol versions in between the client, which is supposed to be associated with the mobile control plane, and the agent, which is about taking the data model to be specifying and deriving the data plane configuration out of it. So this enables flexible distribution of components and data planes. So the executive summary of the two updates which we provided for IETF 98 is that we address quite a lot of comments that we received, mainly regarding clarification, terminology, and some medical limits that have been fixed. Still, there are some open issues there. Charlie has been added as the board, but we also provided valuable comments in the last meeting afterwards. Also have clarified the context. Course spec actually has more alignment with the data model, so we bring both together and try to clarify in particular the course specification that allows easier implementation of what we're specifying here. So the current release actually resolves some young conflicts and about the open items where people talk with you. So, brief summary of the model principles. So after working through the specification, it was a little bit more simplified. The current model is more appropriate to serve mobile subscribers, so that was a lesson learned. That's basically the three models that are being specified, which is topology, which specifies an abstract data plane, and it's mainly meant to be pre-configured. So that's an abstract view that's available to the control plane to pick a particular data plane node or multiple data plane nodes, which are supposed to enforce the policies and the control of the control plane. Then there is something what we call policy. It's a group of rules that's mainly meant for pre-configuration. So anything that can be used by a mobile subscription can be pre-configured here. And finally, when the mobile node attaches, the session states, the mobility session states, they go into a context structure. And all of them, well, the mobility context has to come with one or multiple policies or policy groups, and the binding in between, that's what we do with virtual port. So all the information for a mobility session from context, from policy groups, and port binding, that is the agent's role to enforce when leaving the selected data plane. So brief information about some things that have been added and updated in addition to editorial limits. So there were discussions in the site activity. It's not a working group, but it's on network slicing, net slices. And they are mainly handling grouping of resources with slices. So most people are probably aware of that concept. There are similarities with what the FTC specification does, which is grouping data plane nodes that are supposed to enforce data plane rules under control of the control plane. So we group these data plane nodes and call actually such a group that stands up a virtual network domain. So we found that there is some relationship between what we call domain and the group resources, which is called slices in other areas. So that kind of binding has been enabled, and a link from a domain to the actual virtualized or physical resources that have been added to the current data model. Well, yeah, there is, that's actually the illustration of what I just said. So this is what the FTC agent is supposed to see in terms of domains, which means a group of data plane nodes and data plane groups. And each of these domains can have actually a reference the data plane resources, whether that's virtualized or physical, or these pictures are actually well known in terms of building slices, network slices. So here, the main reference to such a resource has been added in the data model. There has been found the need to instantiate the actual resources where an abstract data plane node has to enforce rules under control of the control plane. So if the agent receives a command from the client to instantiate or to enforce a certain policy in the data plane node, but the physical resources or virtual resources of that data plane node have not been established yet, we added some text that the FPC agent actually can have a link to the control platform to instantiate the physical resources, which are actually meant to enforce the rules. So that has been added. Let's see if this is clear and sufficient for more feedback in terms of reviews and clarity for it. This is again to depict the previous item. So this is what the FPC agent actually sees. So an abstracted data plane in terms of nodes, topology, and this is actually the resources, which may be physical or virtual. So in case the virtual resource is not yet established, instantiated, the agent may initiate instantiating that before enforcing and configuring that data plane node with the policies it received. So text has been added to clarify that. Couple of other things like adding NSH and segment routing draft as a reference that could serve as next hop attributes in the mobility model. Some editorial stuff, so far we call the actual wide protocol interface envelope protocol that has been changed to interface protocol. I think that was one of the ones. We removed some text and have more clarification on multi-tenancy, how that graph actually supports multi-tenancy between client and agent. So we also added some text to clarify that the configurability is not only regarding runtime and context from mobility sessions, but we also can instantiate policies and rules, which I previously mentioned should be or can be pre-configured and referred to, so that such a rule of policy can also be instantiated on demand when the control plane instantiates context and it's an additional policy which. So that kind of separation is what we try to clarify. But you see later there is still some discussion between authors, and that's what we want to show today, where we are regarding this relationship between context, policies, virtual port, and how are they used and how the agent actually forces the data model into the data plane. So there are some open items which we need to converge on. So remaining discussion points. So that's actually what I just said, that terminology has been adjusted based on some discussion and requests from Charlie, and I think virtual port, replacing the port term, is now clearer. Still, we are struggling a little bit with if this is the right term for what it actually means. So before, after version 3, we had the port term introduced, it survived in version 4 to version 7, but so the semantics, how this is being used and what it's supposed to do, is a little bit different. So we currently keep the port in the current draft, but we either add more text to clarify its role, because currently it's binding between the mobility context and policy rules. Or we may find that another name is more appropriate for that. So maybe your process. So in addition to the tunnel attribute, which comes with mobility session context, the next hop would be referred to, and this enables a flexible inclusion of service function chaining or segment routing into the mobility data flow. So how to include next hop information and how to treat it together with the tunnel information, which can be a tunnel endpoint, which is pretty remote. So actually you could derive next hop information out of the tunnel endpoint. But if you want to deviate from that, for some reason, for example, you want to have a source routing options enabled or have a service function chain being your next hop, you can refer to that with the next hop attribute. So that has been added. Agents, features, and capabilities topic. So there was
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So I have a hard time visualizing this. So are you seeing this as being part of like a segment routing domain or like some kind of SFC domain sitting in the middle of it? Because I don't see how a next hop being something in the middle of the domain is useful other than you being part of the domain. Does it make sense?
well, you may think about EGN with Kubernetes tunnel, and as a next hop, there's a service function chain.
No, but, okay, so I'll put a question in a different way. So let's say there's like a SFC domain, right? There's like a stuff where SFC works, or like segment routing domain. So either you're inside the domain or outside. I always thought all these things are outside the domain. So are you thinking like this would be part of the domain inside? Because all the IDs that are defined as next hop in the draft now, like are relevant only in that domain, right?
Right.
Satoru-san, you want to talk about it?
Satoru Matsushima from SoftBank. Original intention to include the SFC and SRDC in next topic indicate that service path ID as a next hop as outside of the mobility domain. When we see the mobility domain, management domain connected to the outside of the network, which may employ some sort of the SFC stuff and SR stuff. Then the mobile network needs to be capable to point that ID or path from the mobile side. That's our intention. So the including both of the tunnel, mobility tunnel on the and the FSC and the SR is to integrate one just next hop parent object, and then the child will be varied to indicate each of the type. One is tunnel, one is SFC, one is SR. That's a sort of thing will be that's what I showed.
Okay, thank you, Satoru-san. But so the SFC domain, right? When you enter the domain, there's already a classifier sitting in there, which is trying to do this thing, right? So what happens if like whatever's on the packet like doesn't match like whatever that the domain would have done when classifying the thing, right? So let's say you say like this is going into SID whatever, and then the domain would have come up with SID something else. What happens, right? Like so, if you have two ways of doing the same thing, like there might be like a conflict there, right? So that's what I want to figure out. Like maybe there's like probably more text needed, like how you see this working.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's one more context. All right, feature and capability discovery. So in general, there was a point of how the client learns about whether an agent is a single VPN agent or if it's sitting on top of a controller and with multiple. So the graph application actually differentiates between single VPN and multi-VPN case. Nevertheless, no additional mechanisms required as from the topology model the client sees if the agent is multi-VPN or single VPN. In addition, some need to define a generic way for discovery between the client. We are currently thinking about the mechanisms that can be added for discovery. In general, not only about which type of agent this is, but general discovery mechanisms. Monitors, yeah. Monitors were actually added to the specification early. Don't go back in details how this is being used and operated. So we added currently two references from actually the 3GPP specification about alarm integration and configuration management. More references are to be added, as well as details need to be specified how the monitors are registered. So it's about control plane that point some monitoring of data plane by partial of failure, which are then to be reported back to the control plane. So these details may either be added to this specification or to separate documents. If it goes into the document, we need to see how multiple FTC related documents can get on. So there's no decision yet how to use to take the inventory to a monitor registration and then reporting testing of where we find specified instances. And yeah, this is something from live. So you may remember that I reported about open source implementation of the FTC agent to the audio project. And he posted an email to some time ago where code actually was not yet available, but so far can be retrieved from the audio repository, which you can find as a link on that slide. And yeah, next plans are to, of course, solicit more reviews, such as the one service provider that more verification is needed for the next stop. Or you just see what you read in the draft is not clear, you send a mail to the mailing list, and that's discussed all the so that's really needed. There are some open items which we are well aware of that we need to verify, and we want to make extensive use of this week face-to-face meetings. And at the end of the week, hopefully we have a review what we're going to work in 8. But that doesn't replace the already existing comments. So we need to see if there are people who are not in that class. This is understandable. And then finally, yeah, it's a hope that we can go for working with us probably before IETF 99, but it depends on the discussion with broadcast and other.
So thank you, Marco. Any questions? So Marco, some more clarity on the next steps. So what are all the open issues? Like you think you'll be able to resolve them in the next month to 2 months?
So the open items we are aware of, we started this discussion yesterday evening, and as said, one of these obviously face-to-face meeting. Let's see how far we go, but we plan to conclude them also through virtual meetings and after this IETF. And yeah, that's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Or open items pop up which are unclear, or there are contradictions, there's contradicting text in the draft. So it depends on the additional feedback we get from the working group.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Marco. And thanks for all the contributions. I think you guys have put in amazing efforts. Yeah, Satoru-san, Marco, Lai, others. Okay. So the next presentation
should be the distributed mobility anchoring. So Anthony, are you ready to present? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, is on. Okay.
It's just an update, so it's going to be short. I mean, we said the document was ready last time at the last meeting, so the last call was issued after the meeting, but accidentally I missed a comment from Alex on the to add an appendix on to describe the mobility. So, so I added that in. that was in section 5.5. And as a result of that, there was domino effect. That was expanded a little bit. Introduction was expanded, it was quite more clearly. And section 3 was elaborated, and section 4 some corrections. So those are all the changes from the last time this time. And the rest were just put down for your just for your information. Section 3 is basically to describe the different situations, so you have the different operations and different message parameters. And using that, it doesn't define them, it will describe them because it's called it stays as information by draft. And using those functions, then in section 4 and 5, we describe all the different cases, how to do it. The red part is the section that we added to the record. So section 5 are all the examples. The rest is just for information. We presented last time already. For example, one example is to move from one network to another network, so just using one address. And then second one is to move the different network, but carry the OIP address to the next network. And the side hand is to add a hierarchy. And then do a host mobility, and then do a network mobility. These are all presented last time. So this is just a correction because we said it already last time, but because Alex email ran out probably on the same day of the meeting, so I didn't catch that. So the rest of the will be given for you to review it and see whether it's ready and not ready. Right? That's all I need. I don't need 20 minutes. It's just a short update.
Okay, so any questions? So on this document, we want a couple of some good reviews actually. I think, two things, editorial part is one thing. The other part is from technical point of view. I think technically the document should be sound, right? I'm not sure who all reviewed the document or that discussion needs to happen. Can we, chairs ask for a few volunteers to review this document and post some, feedback? Can somebody please sign up? All right. Okay. Baiju, Carlos, Seal, and Marco. Okay. So we'll have it on the notes and they'll do some focus reviews, and based on that feedback, we'll if you guys can update it, we'll take it forward. Yeah. Okay. No, not next meeting. I think this needs to happen in the next month, 2 months. So can you please follow up with these guys and make sure that they, whatever they're promising to. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. For the next one is on-demand mobility management, socket extensions.
What is this slide? Extensions. Name of the document.
Socket. Yeah, that's right. Socket.
One thing that the chair that if you have this materials for today's presentation, would you just upload to the meeting material management?
We'll upload it right after the meeting. Sorry about that. So this is a socket extensions, an update from Danny. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Sorry about that. So this is quite an old draft and a little bit of history. Version 7 has completed workgroup last call and was sent to IESG. for review. And in the last face-to-face, there was another draft that was related to this work, and the workgroup decided to merge both documents. So we pulled out this draft from the ISG review and merged the documents, CL and myself. And after that, we released version 8 and started workgroup last call once again. And then we received some very good comments from people in the working group, not related to the merge, but it was a good opportunity to review the draft again. And we made several changes, and we got to version 10, which is the one that is currently on the list. The main changes were in some cases where we mentioned source IP address as something that is conveyed between the network and the device, to change that to prefix rather than IP address. And there was a request for some C code examples. So we added these and in release 10. There are 2 points that I would like to discuss, and actually these are the reason why I didn't ask for workgroup last call once again. The first point is related to blocking versus non-blocking function. The original function that is being used, set sock options, is a non-blocking function, meaning if a software calls this function, it will return immediately with results. And with this new feature, there are cases where you ask for an IP address which is which might result in a mobile node requesting something from the network and waiting for a result. And that might take time. And in the meantime, the function will be blocking. And there was a concern that this new behavior might be confusing. Now, there are 3 alternatives that we can think about, and I would like the input from the room as to what we choose. One will say, okay, let's define a new function. Let's not use set socket options. Let's define a new function. That function will be blocking in some cases, and the confusion will be resolved. The second alternative is to keep using set socket option, but to define a new option, IPv6 mobility on demand, something like that, which will cover the specific extensions that we are discussing in this draft. So rather than using the existing IPv6 address preference option, use a new one. And of course, the third alternative is just to leave everything as it is and rely on good documentation to clarify that in some cases the behavior might be blocking. My personal preference is option number 2, which is to define a new option. And this option might be blocking. This way, we don't touch existing behavior of the IPv6 address preference. And I think that may solve a potential confusion. I wouldn't like to define a new socket function. This sounds to me like too big of a change to the socket interface, and I don't think this justifies that. So this is why my preference is the second preference, but I would like to hear from the group. So
Lorenzo Colletti, I don't think it's ever okay for setsock to block. The way it currently works, at least in Linux, is that setsock goes directly into the kernel, which is, and something that's going to cause it to block is never going to be upstreamed. It's just Not going to happen, because the only thing that setsock-opt ever does is it twiddles some flags inside the socket structure, and then it returns. So if we want to implement this in any clean way in Linux, it can't be setsock-opt. It has to be something else.
So are you thinking about a solution where it returns with some flag and then there will be a callback or something like that? Excuse me?
No, so the problem here is that, you're using setsock-opt to do IP address provisioning, which is, it could never complete.
Yeah.
And so, no, it has to be something else. And in fact, I think setsock-opt is actually the wrong call. You should do something that's more control plane oriented. You should have some library that gives you an address, and then, that should sort of tell the kernel that that address is there.
I would like a more specific solution or suggestion.
Okay, so Krishnan, so I think the point is setsock-opt is not designed to do this. I think that is the main takeaway. So we can think of like a lot of solutions, but that's not what setsock-opt does. So does that make sense? Because you cannot just wait on forever, for something to happen.
It doesn't have to wait forever. You could always have some kind of a watchdog or something like that. You can think of a solution that prevents setsock-opt to wait forever. We can. Right, I know. Okay.
So it has different semantics, setsock-opt. So I don't believe we can do that.
So basically what you're saying is define a new function, but I think that what you were saying is that Linux, you can't define a function that doesn't return or doesn't return within a reasonable time. Is that correct?
For example, that's not true, right? Because receive, you can just wait for something to happen, right? But you have something to unblock it. So you need to some way for somebody. So if you want to do this in an asynchronous way, kind of it's fine, right? So if it's you do a setsock-opt and pull on it or whatever. I have no idea how you're going to do this, but just waiting on it is not going to work. It's not how setsock-opt is designed to work. Right? Setsock-opt is it goes into the SKB and it does something, right? Like socket block pretty much, and then that's all, right? You cannot wait for it to on some indeterminate thing. You can say it could be return quickly or not at all complete, right? So you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, there are other socket functions. There are socket functions that don't return immediately with the result.
Like I said,
right?
receive, for example, right? You're waiting for somebody to send you a packet.
Like when you start a TCP, like when you start a TCP session and you have to wait for the ACK and stuff like that. Right. That takes time, and it could also potentially never end. So the socket interface supports that.
But there is okay. So what I would do is I'll pull on some kind of socket descriptor to see if there's something for me to actually go and receive from, right? How do I do that with setsock-opt? Does that make sense? So I could have a poll loop sitting in there, waiting for something to unblock, and then I go and look.
You don't have to do a busy loop. You could you can define a task or something like that and have it dormant until.
But you cannot determine people's programming models because some people do multi-threading, some people don't.
Right. I didn't want to. I didn't. That's why there isn't anything in the text of the draft that suggests how to do that. But I was assuming that people know how to do that.
No, but what if people don't want to, let's say, I know how to do threading and I don't want to do it. If you have a blocking call, that means my programming model is outside the door, right?
But the socket interface has blocking calls. This is not the only one. Yep. Okay.
So that's what I was talking about poll, right? And it used to be select before, right? I would select on a set of things. There's an FD set, and I sit on this thing first and select.
So another alternative that I can think of is define a non-blocking call. It will return saying, I don't know, operation started. Yeah. And at some point, if we define a callback function, the callback function will be called by the kernel. Is that
No, but you need to write it to figure out if it makes sense, right? So for example, netlink would be, I don't know if it's something you can do, but you can probably use netlink to do this, right? But then it's OS specific. Then for BSD, you need to do something else, right? Routing sockets or something. But it's something you need to do, but the setsock-opt is not the right function. I think that's probably like what people are saying, right? So that's a comment. Like, yeah, go ahead.
Eric Klein. So I think what you probably end up need to having maybe this idea is you need to split it into two. I think you still want your set sock opt, right? Because you want the applications wants to be able to tell what its preferences are. But set sock opt just sort of needs to like basically instantaneously set something, and if you try to like get a source address, then it needs to fail because it didn't have a
It could
mobility
fail if
prefix.
it doesn't have the resource.
But all that stuff is like immediate, right?
Right.
So you need a separate function, and I want to use the analogy of basically getEtterInfo, right?
Okay.
You want getEtterInfo as another function. It blocks. You could have a non-blocking variant with callbacks or whatever you have. But basically, you have another thing that says provisioning, like provision me this type of prefix, right? And you can block on that. You can put that in its own thread in sleep, like you would do with a getEtterInfo call, or you could have some other service handle that, or something like that. The rest of the stuff all needs to be like immediate after the provisioning succeeds. Like all the set sock up call, which you still want to specify your options, and so on and so forth. So think of it more like getEtterInfo. You need to like wait for it to do all these DNS queries and go to the network and come back and do all this stuff, and then you've got a target DNS address to which you can connect, right? And everything else can be done in a non-blocking way after that. And you can, regrettably, the getEtterInfo call itself was never specified to have a non-blocking interface, but your new function call get mobility prefix could have blocking and non-blocking variants.
So let me see if I understand.
No, does that seem?
So my understanding is, okay, we'll call set socket option, and it'll either return with a result, with whatever we wanted it done, or with some status saying it's a process started. But no, okay.
Not at all what I said. What I said, as far as you're concerned, is probably number one. Right, and to split it into two. So set sock opt needs to say, you still want set sock opt, right? To say, I require a mobility prefix or a persistent prefix or something. I forget.
It's not a preferred. It's a session lasting.
Yeah, right. I prefer one of these things. And then if I try to make a connect call right away, or I try to do something right away, it needs to fail. The kernel will fail me because I haven't got that. I may not have a matching source address yet, right?
Okay.
Before I call that set sock opt, though, what an application needs
before
to do,
I call connect or set
before I call that set sock opt,
yeah,
or before I call connect. You're right. Sorry, before I call connect, I need to make some other function call, some getEtterInfo like call, some get mobility prefix
to figure
call.
out if the address was assigned to me or not, or the prefix was
the
assigned.
provisioning process.
Yeah.
That's right, and that thing has to go off to the network and do its provisioning and do its
To start the
entitlement checks.
provisioning, or to figure out if the why can't set socket option start the provisioning, and this other function end it? It'll return immediately. It'll just start the provisioning. It won't complete it.
You're going to add because basically you're going to have that's going to be probably in Linux, for example, on Android. That's probably going to be done in user space, right?
Yeah.
And so now you've got something inside the kernel in set sock opt that's going to have to like figure out which user space program to run to talk to the network, to talk to the mobile operators network to say, hey, can I get this prefix? Am I authorized for this? Is my billing up to date? You know, all the other checks that mobile operators want to do, right? And that's going down into the kernel to have it trigger user space stuff. Like that's not really the best design anymore, right?
Okay, so let's see. So now we're thinking of the
Danny,
following.
I think we need to wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah,
so I would
behind
very
me.
much like either to talk with you later on or discuss it
Okay.
on the list, because I would like to complete that.
No, I think another 5 minutes is okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave Dolson. It seems like what you're proposing is a bit disconnected from what people think are reasonable to implement. So I'm suggesting maybe we need implementation in FreeBSD or Linux, for example, to that would that those developers would be happy with. Say like because
Okay.
And having said that, my hunch is that this can be used to express a preference, but not to do provisioning. So, Right. I mean, I'm thinking of the analogy with like DH client, which is where the DHCP stuff happens. It's a different layer than the socket. The application never does anything to get an IP address. It can only live with, it can only live with what's been provisioned.
Right.
So to kick off any of the socket stuff it can be a preference. You know, if there happens to be an address already there, you can use it. But to get the address there, it seems like it's a different flow. But anyway, I guess my feedback is that there needs to be something that the kernel developers are going to be happy with.
I agree. That's why I brought it here and not just, you know.
Suresh Krishnan. So like, I'll tell you what I think, okay? Like no AD hat or anything. So I think the setsock should like say like, okay, hey application, yes, I understood that you want this, bye, thank you, and nothing more. So like if application sets a flag and you set the flag and return, like what do you do afterwards?
Unless it can provision the request immediately. If it could, great, right?
No, but like the setsock is not for provisioning a request. It's like for setting some flag in some structure somewhere. That's it, right? Like
yes, but setsock. If for example I want a non-persistent address, and I use set socket option to request a non-persistent address, the address already exists. It will return and say set.
No. The address existing, it has nothing to do with setsock, right? That's the point. Like I think that's the disconnect between you and the rest of the people. Setsock just says, this is some preference I want to set on the socket, period. Whether the address exists or not, it's not setsock's business. So if I say like reuse address as like a socket example, it means nothing. Like if you're going to reuse it or not, it's just that the application is setting some flag, right? It's like you ask for a t-shirt here, which is L, like they hear it and they may or may not be L t-shirts here, okay? So you're setting some preference on the socket. Whether or not something happens is completely immaterial. Like even if it's not there, the setsock is not blocking on it. You're just saying like, hey, this is a preference I have on the socket. Like on the socket, I would like to use this kind of address. That's it. Okay. Then some other call later could end up using that or not. Okay. But it's not related to setsock. You're just setting an option on the socket. Period. So that's why, like when you say immediate or it's going to take, like people are getting confused because that's not how setsock is used. Does it make sense?
I'm not sure. So actually you're saying don't use set socket options.
No. I'm saying setsock has like a specific thing. When you do an option, like it sets some option on a socket, which is used for something else. At some point, it changes some behavior on the socket at some point, not on the setsock call itself. The call only says like, I want to change. If you think of it in a very basic way, you're changing some bit and some structure somewhere. That's all it should do. Period.
So Danny, how would we take it to the list and essentially like I think you may want to document. I think based on the feedback from Eric, Suresh, and Lorenzo, right? Why don't you document a list of options and like get the feedback from the working group, okay. Right? I think that might be. Okay. I think Lorenzo, please go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what Suresh said. Okay, just wanted to add to what Suresh said. I think setsock is not synchronous. It doesn't do anything. It just sets a preference for the future. What you need is something to set that preference, and then you'll only actually get an answer when you try to do something, like when you call connect, right? Because between the time when you set the option and you actually attempt to use what you want, something might have changed, and also the kernel doesn't actually know what you want until you actually tell it to do something. So you say setsock, but for example, if it hasn't done a routing lookup, it doesn't know if it has the right address to do what you want, because you might not even have told it which network you need to do this connection on. And so until you actually say, well, do this, it might not know what to do. So basically what happens is what you want is some preference that's actually mandatory, saying, I don't just prefer this type of address, I need this type of address. And then when you call connect, it might say EAD or not avail or something.
Okay, we'll take it to the list because right now I'm confused and we'll try to resolve it.
Hi, Danny. A quick summary. I think based on the discussion we have, maybe setups can set some preference. And when you actually use connect or you want to really do the connection, based on the preference, you can get the
fail.
Fail or get the.
Is that what you propose? So you're also not proposing a new function. You're just saying don't block until the IP address or the prefix was provided, continue.
It's needed. Like you don't do anything until it's needed.
Right.
There's some other call that's gonna.
But the application needs to know whether the resource was provided or not, and you're saying you could do that through the connect.
Yeah, the kernel, if you make a call that requires a source address be selected, and it's not available, it should tell you with an error no at that time.
During the connect.
During the
The
connect, or
connect
during
will
the send
return-
message, or during any of the other umpteen calls that you might make on a socket,
Oh,
that
I
will
I
result
do
in a source
connect-
address being
I'll do a
selected.
connect before a send message, so why not?
Well, you might be using UDP, you don't have to connect,
Oh, right.
right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's lots of points in
okay.
time in which a source address can be selected in the kernel.
Okay.
If you set your socket that says I have to have this, and when you get to that source address selection moment, if it's not available, the kernel will throw EADDR not available to you, but you still need a separate call, a non-sock opt call, a get adder info equivalent of get prefix, get provisioning, provision me a prefix call that returns some integer value that starts the provisioning process.
Not necessarily if I find a way to use that through send message or through connect.
No.
Why?
No, again, that's the same problem, right? Like all this other stuff, the set sock opt and the error at source address selection time, that's all very instantaneous for the kernel. There's no blocking, there's nothing else to be done, right? It's a routing lookup in the kernel based on all state it already has. It doesn't have to go to the network to do anything. This is like get adder info. You need to do all of these DNS lookups before you have the address to connect to. This is the same thing. You need to do all of this provisioning mechanics, talk to the network, authenticate, et cetera, get something provisioned, get it plumbed into the kernel. That's a completely separate stage that has nothing to do with connect, send message, or set sock opt.
So would you say, would it be a good idea to explore the possibility of adding some new option to get address info to support that? Rather than, no, why not?
No,
Because it's getting address info. You could say this is.
The DNS lookup was an example of the kind of API you need. A different call, right? That may maybe a blocking variant and a non-blocking variant if you want to have two variants, but at least one variant of something that, and maybe just the one blocking variant, right? And what people will do is it'll be run as a service in its own threads, and some operating systems will provide some API that calls over that says, please start this provisioning process.
Okay.
And a status result.
Yeah, maybe last.
Okay, Suresh Krishnan. So I'll try to take this from a different angle, okay? So like whatever you're going to do here, you're going to change some socket API implementation, right? You're going to change something. So for example, take the connect, okay? So let's say you change connect. So the connect still has to like do something and return an error, okay? So this one sets some options. So I'll give you a completely different example to try to clarify what like the semantics are for this, okay? So one of the sock options is like setting a receive buffer size, okay? And it's not going to get used, whatever you said, nothing's going to be used until you actually call receive on the socket, okay? So same thing, whatever you said is not going to be used until some other call happens later in the future. And you're going to be implementing that call, okay? So inside that call, you could see if an address is present or not, okay? And if an address is present, you can succeed. If the address is absent, you can fail. What you cannot do is like just wait on the address to get done, okay? So if you want to wait for something to happen between these two calls, you need to spin on it. So you could like, so that could be the new function where you spin on, which says like, okay, until I get this address, you spin on it. But it's not set sock opt or it's not like connect of any other current calls that are there because you cannot change how they work. But you can have another function which is like polling on something on the kernel which waits before you do connect.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'll write something down and I'll send it on the list just for this specific issue, and hopefully we'll get a agreement, and then I'll add it to the draft.
So Danny, but just for completeness, right? Can you propose all the options in the list, like option A, B, and C, or whatever, right? And let working group comment on each of the options.
If I manage to think of several options, I'll do that and I'll put it on the list like I did here. I'm not trying to hide something, but right now it looks like there's only one option that people like here. So
yeah, I think first.
And by the way, people can respond and offer other solutions, and we can discuss them.
Yeah, I think we have a very good discussion today. You can try to catch up the solutions, ideas, and another good suggestions based on discussion, I think is that maybe you can try to implement the proposal. Then you can know, okay, from the developer's perspective, what's the problem to use this API, and whether it's it should work or not.
So I added a section with code example in the draft.
No,
and
not only code example. I mean, you can actually implement.
It's difficult to implement because you need the support of the network to provide the resources. So we can't really implement that right now.
Yeah, but the standard need to be implemented. Otherwise, it's not useful, right? For anyone need to implement
right
that.
now, if
someone needs to implement that. Right.
Okay.
Or maybe, we need to get some feedback from the Kame community or somebody who did this kind of implementation, right? Some domain experts, like, maybe, whoever it is, right? I think, get some more specific feedback. So if your example is like how to use the API, that doesn't mean anything, because if I implement this library, if it's blocking, if it messes up the fundamental semantics, it's no good, right? So we want feedback from the guys who implemented the socket library, not the usage of your API or definitions.
For the protocol to actually go to the network and get provisioned the prefix and get it routed to you and all that kind of stuff, yeah, you'll need cooperation with the network operator. But for your own testing purposes, like, you can just mock that out inside of some library, right? Like, you have an application, it makes all the right calls, it tests your API, and then in the actual implementation of the thing that it calls, it just does IP root add whatever it is, and secretly just sort of fakes it.
Okay.
And you also have a DHCP extension proposals. You can also implement that, then you can test.
Okay, last point. What did I do?
No.
Okay. Originally, the draft was written so that there is a bit for each type of address that we want, or service. And two things happen. First of all, that's just for the knowledge of the people in the group, similar work is being done in SA2, 3GPP right now. So it's a good thing because we can be in sync with them. They have one specific service which we don't support, which is SSC mode 3. I can describe it, but I don't think we need that for the current discussion. But that got me thinking, maybe we want to define some generic or vendor-specific types of support that we won't define exactly what they are, but we will leave them in the extension so that if some other group wants to use that service, they can do that without coming to IETF and say, hey, we need to do some RFC work, you need to change this RFC in order to support that. So I would like to suggest that we add vendor-specific ability to this interface, and also change the format of the fields from 3 bits, a bit for each service, to 3 bits with a code from 0 to 7 describing the different types of services that we want, because you can never ask for 2 services in one request. So this sounded to me like a better choice. So I'm bringing it here. I hope this is acceptable, and I'll make the changes. That's a very small change compared to the other comment that we got. Okay. So we'll work on fixing the blocking, non-blocking issue, and then hopefully start a work group last call again.
Okay, that works. Yeah. Thank you. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one is also Dennis on-demand DHCP6 extension. Yeah.
And it'll be a very short one, so I'll give you back the time that was wasted before.
Yeah. This is on.
Okay. One slide. I was asking for work group adoption in Seoul, and I received, by the way, sorry, this is about extensions to DHCP in order to convey to the network the request for a specific type of address or type of service. It's also has been, we were working on that for I think more than a year. And I was seeking work group adoption in SIL. And I received a major comment from Lorenzo asking to remove the extensions to support the request of an IP address and change it to IP prefix. And then I also received an input from Alex saying, you can do IP prefix, but leave the IP address we needed for a certain use case. So what I did, I changed the text in the draft to reflect the request of an IP prefix as the major operation that will be done. And I added a reference to RFC 7933, which recommends how to request IP prefixes from the network. And basically, this is what I did. I have no other work, and I'm seeking workgroup adoption again.
Okay. Any comments, questions, comments?
34, sorry.
Suresh, yeah.
Suresh Krishnan. So I'm fine with whatever the working group does, but I really have a concern with like how this thing uses DHCP. Okay, so you have like something encapsulated inside like a DHCP IA address or whatever, and you're expecting the server to behave differently based on what's inside. Because no address available is something specific for a DHCP server, right? So there seems to be some kind of like server behavior change required by this. So I really want this to run by DHC as well.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
I didn't think it was reasonable to go to DHC before I get workgroup adoption.
No, that's not necessary. But like I think this time, like I probably the time is like we have a short slot for DHC, so I think it's not going to happen. But I think we should take it up on the DHC mailing list, so I can pass this on, saying like, okay, DMM is like considering adopting it. Like whether or not it adopts is different, but I'm really concerned. Like the
I was never thinking of avoiding DHC.
No, that's fine. Like, but I just want to make sure it runs by them and see if because like they have like more server implementers there who can probably provide better feedback on this.
Okay. So I think Danny, maybe if you can do a presentation to the working group or whatever, right? I think
to DHC.
Yeah.
I will do next time. I prefer to do that.
Okay.
With an adopted draft and not just an individual draft.
Lorenzo.
Do you how does the document justify the use of IP addresses? Because there's got to be some text that says this is why we are intentionally standardizing something that doesn't follow best current practices.
Look, DHCP supports requesting an IP address. If that specific functionality would be removed from DHCP v6, I would have no problem. But right now, it looks awkward that DHCP v6 has the ability to request an address, and we don't provide the ability to define what type of address we want. But if you read the text again, it really talks about prefixes.
But Dan, if I may comment, right? If you look at all the mobility work that we did, with v6 or PME v6, we pretty much standardized that a UE gets a prefix.
Right.
We pretty much moved away from the model where a UE gets it from IPv4.
And it's written there. This is what you should do. Okay. Maybe is Alex in the room? Okay, sorry, I didn't see it.
So
Alex has a specific use case saying support IP prefix, IP address as well, and it's not a lot of work, and the DHCP option to request an IP address exists. So
no, but the question is in the context of MIP, right? If there's an architectural impact, we already moved away. We are even 3GPP or even IETF. We are adopted a model where a UE gets a prefix, right? With that, now if Alex is requesting something, it's against the architectural. There's an architectural impact. I think we need to have a discussion. So we cannot just add a support to that. I agree with others.
I mean, we are always talking about this IP address that is continuous, sustained, that is all these things, okay? So how can you request an address? What's the tool to request an address?
It's a prefix, so I think we need to review that. It's,
So at that point, do we talk about prefix that is sustained, prefix that is continuous or session lasting and so on?
Yeah.
Eric Klein, I want to offer a clarification. What I think needs to happen here is the application might request an address, right? That's different from what the host should do, which is request a prefix and then a separate function inside the host, not DHCP, a separate function inside the host after it gets the prefix says, oh, this is your address for your application.
Right. We talked about that, and yeah, we're in sync here. Yeah.
So you don't need to request an address through DHCP. You request the prefix, and then the separate host allocation function decides which IP address the application gets.
You are right. You are right, and I would say that for 99.9% of the cases, this is what will happen. I'm not aware of all the cases in the world. Maybe there might be a case where in some implementation, a device will need its DHCP client. I can't think of an example asking for an address and not a prefix.
If you can't think of an example, then you shouldn't do it.
But Alex has one. So I trust it. And just a minute. And what I was trying to say is, if we don't need DHCP support for IP address allocation, let's remove it from DHCP. But DHCP does support IP address allocation.
Then I suggest that you take every possible DHCP6 option that can be used that might return a different result based on whether your IP address is stable or not, and add this tag to all of them. For example, I would argue that if you in the SNTP server option for DHCP or in the DNS server option, you should be able to say whether you want a DNS server that's accessible from a stable prefix or from a non-stable prefix. So that's the same argument. So you're not liking that one, and I don't like yours. So I think that we're both on shaky ground there. So I don't think just because IANA exists doesn't mean that you have to use it.
Yeah, so Krishnan, so this is not getting removed from DHCP v6, the address allocation, right? But like I'm on the same ground as Sri said, okay? We have an MNHNP, we don't have an MNHNA, okay? For example, right? So like we have a home network prefix that like we get passed on. So I really think like you should write like whatever Alex, I'm sure Alex has a use case and I wanted to write it up in this document. That's it. Whatever like he has, like just write it up. If you want to do the address allocation, just put it in there saying, okay, this is why we're doing addresses. Because like for example, PMU v6 doesn't say like, like nobody's asking for like, it's always a prefix. And like most of the SDO deployment models have gone towards prefixes, right? And it looks like we are walking back evolution, right? Like we are moved in v6 to this kind of prefix kind of thing. And then suddenly we are walking back. And not to say, right, like at the end, the application is going to get an address, okay? So if you have the same IID, however you generate it, and you get the same prefix, you're going to have the same address, right? So like the DHCP server is saying like, hey, like, this prefix is yours. And you say like, oh, can I have this address inside the prefix? Of course you can. It's like your prefix.
Do it, yeah.
So, but it's not up to the DHCP server because you're putting additional state on the DHCP server where it's not needed, right? Because like if it doesn't have to maintain address by address, and if it's not going to subdivide the prefix, it doesn't make sense for the DHCP server to maintain state.
Okay, so I see two alternatives. Either remove the support for the request of a specific IP address, or document the specific use case. And in that case, Alex, I'll need your help.
So I agree with the later, right? I think, if you can somehow address Alex's use case without, breaking the, the architectural assumptions, whatever we made so far, I think that will be good, right? Maybe work with him and document it, yeah.
So,
Alex, yeah.
So I think the argument of DHCP protocol allocating addresses should be enough. I don't think it should be enough to also at least mention it in this document. Okay, we cannot ignore it. We cannot discard DHCP. We are not making DHCP v6 for us historical or something. Okay, and there are implementations out there. Ignoring them sounds like it's not I know it's not normal, right?
I think maybe, clarification, right, Alex? I think we are not talking about DHCP. I think there is a IPv address allocation support that's already has been there in DHCP for a long time. We are not talking about that. In the context of mobility, we assume that when a UE requests, it gets a prefix. We are not allocating a individual 128-bit address or anything, right? We are always saying you have your own prefix. You request 50 addresses, use all, whatever /64 in that within that block, you can use it, but we are giving you your prefix is yours. Nobody else, you cannot share that prefix with others. That is the assumption that's already went into the specs. Now, I don't care what DHCP is supporting individually. That is irrelevant. In the context of mobility, we are giving a prefix to the UE. That's it.
Suresh Krishnan. So Alex, so because we are doing prefixes for mobiles, we had some cool innovations that happened. For example, 64 share. Okay, you have a mobile, you get a 64, and then you can tether your mobile to other things behind you. Okay, so now that you make it an address, how does this work? Are you going to have NATs now, right? So there's a lot of things that have been built around the 64-bit, mobile getting a 64-bit, and if you start doing it differently, the burden is really on whoever wants this address to actually explain how things are going to work, not the other way. DHCP has a lot of things. I don't want to go on Lorenzo's path because I don't think it makes sense, but I don't think we can do all DHCP options here, right? DHCP has different use cases, right? There's different things happen in fixed, different things happen in mobile, right? In this specific case, everything we've done is we okay? So, and even I know you did Nemo a while ago, right? It's a prefix. Right, so we cannot go back and point to something where we say hey, this is address and whatever. You assume the mobile router, a mobile router cannot work with one address, right? Stuff like that. So I think we need to recognize the history of mobility. DHCP exists. It has a lot of things. It's a grab bag of things everybody ever wants, right? We don't have to use all of them, right? If the mobile needs it, it's good. But it's up to us to say, okay, this is why the mobile needs an address, rather than getting a prefix and forming the address, because the mobile is entirely capable of getting a prefix of a /64 and putting its 64-bit IID together and then combining them to form the address you want. As long as your IID remains stable, your address is going to remain stable. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, Lorenzo, last comment. Yeah.
Excuse me, I just wanted to answer. So 64 share is not a great innovation. Okay. Second is that I do not oppose the use of prefixes. I agree that the prefixes here maybe should be the spot should be on the prefixes, right? But also the addresses. And so, yeah, that is my comment. And for the 64, well, we can discuss that separately.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah.
Let me go back a bit to the initial statement I made, which is what text in the draft explains why we're violating the best current practices. I didn't say, I didn't say why are we doing HV6. I'm just saying what did we say that justifies that we're going against the guidance of 7934, not only operationally, but we're actually doing a standard that that violates the best current practice. I think the bar for that is very high, and we should have a very solid use case.
Okay.
Particularly, that use case should clarify why you need an address and you can't use 2 to the 64 of them. Yeah. Okay? Because 2 to the 64 is greater than 1, so it gives you the address. It also gives you 2 to the 64 minus 1 addresses that you can also use, right? So so in any use case that you construct, you have to say why it's not enough to give the UE a whole prefix.
Okay.
So like I said, I didn't say that you can't do this. I said you have to have very convincing text.
Yeah, I understand.
Personally, I don't think you'll ever be able to construct that text, but if you do, then.
So thank you, Danny, for that short presentation.
I'm sorry, it was a short presentation, Suresh. But I would like to request workgroup adoption. I mean, these things can still be discussed, but the work
probably not.
The work is interesting.
No, I agree, but we want some feedback from the DHCP working group before we even initiate that call. Yeah, because those are the domain experts. Right? Let DHC working group provide some feedback.
Don't you see any added value by going to DHC with a work group draft rather than individual?
I don't see any added value of it being a working group draft, so I can still send it to the DHC working group, but I don't want to wait till the next meeting cycle. So if that's what you're worried about.
So I want to fix I want to fix this last comment. I'll issue a new version, and then I'll ask you to help me with that.
Yeah, just send me an email, like
Okay.
one of the chairs, either the chair,
Yeah,
please send
I
me an
will,
email.
yeah.
I'll pass it on and get like a review for you. Okay, so
Okay.
if like the
Yeah.
DHC people think it's okay, like, but I really don't like it's the chair's call. Okay, if they want to do the other option and do the other way, I don't mind whichever way it works, right? But if they feel that way, I support them as well, right? Like, so
It's a quick one, sanity check, right? If they don't freak out, we'll on the call here. Yeah.
Okay, so the next presentation is IPv6, ICMPv6 RARS extensions for on-demand mobility. Presenters Wu Chifeng. Yeah, okay. I see. No. Yeah, okay. You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll give you some time back.
No, it's fine.
We'll see.
Yeah, we heard that.
Yes, this might indeed be opening the can of worms farther. We'll see. Well, I'm not seeking working group adoption or anything. This is mostly a informational kind of item. So as we've seen in the last two presentations, as we consider more mobile situations, there's going to be a need for different types of addresses, right? There's these, for this particular group, session lasting IP addresses. So as you're moving around, it lasts. There are also times where you just need a non-persistent address. You're just going to do something simple. So there's no reason to set up all the mobile things. So in the draft that Danny is working on, there's a specification of fixed IP address, session lasting, non-persistent. And this is accomplished through DHCP and, has its, advantages and disadvantages. Router advertisement and router solicitation are the preferred mechanisms in IPv6 for a user or a mobile node to get started. And so the question is, do you feel there's a need to pursue kind of similar work within RARS? So that's what we're thinking about. We're working with some folks in 3GPP who are also starting to use RA and RS in kind of non-standard ways. And so what I'd like to do today is, this is something Danny, myself, and some folks at 3GPP are kind of doing. And so there's kind of two things we're looking for. One is there interest in doing something like this? And if so, I would be willing to kind of start something on the mailing list. Or the other is, if this is a really, really bad idea and we should just stop it now, then we can do that. I don't really want to have a big, long discussion, but we just want to just kind of get a sense for the room. Suresh.
Suresh Krishnan. So, not knowing, because there's no draft, like I cannot like comment with certainty, but in general, it's a bad idea, right? Like it's probably not going to work. Like given that, like, I have like a lot of scars, like from everywhere to working on the space, like I'm sure Sri does and a bunch of other people, like, and we aimed much lower than you are aiming. Okay, so like it was more about like information dissemination with some kind of label,
right? And
even that is something that was very difficult to get, like, let's say, consensus on in any group, right? Like,
right.
And I think it's going to be very difficult, but I really cannot say until you have a draft. Like, so unless you like put together at least like some basic sketches on what you want to be there, because like first thing, RS is optional, right? Like you cannot wait for an RS to send an RA, right? Like you cannot.
Right.
Okay, so like, so what do you do when like there's no RS? Like what does the mobile get, for example, right? Like, so that's one thing you need to solve. So how do you handle like environments with like nodes that ask for something and nodes that don't ask for something,
right?
Okay, or like nodes that ask for different things. So how do you trust these things? And these are all like difficult things. And we tried to do this in 6man a while ago, like probably in MIP6, in Max, and in MIF, like there's like a whole bunch of there's like a lot of work that has been done.
Right.
And before you do work, right, look at all the stuff that has been done and see why it failed. I think that would be like a good place for you to start before you invest a lot of effort in this, right? Because there's been a lot of opposition to this, because it does change fundamentally how RS and RA works. Like no matter where you end up, that's how it's going to end up. So the question is, how can you fix the mistakes? Because we all made mistakes in this space. Okay.
So yeah, so part of it.
I'm not talking this area. I'm talking about like a draft author who's beaten up, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
so that's exactly why we're here. Before we, as you mentioned, part of it is before we go through all this effort, it is useful to hear from the people with all the battle scars. Sorry, you suffered a bunch. But yeah, trying to understand kind of the scope of this before we go, waste a bunch of man hours.
Right. So this is the default negative. So I think it's a bad idea unless there's more information the other way.
Okay.
So that's
right.
how it's set off.
Yeah. And so we're starting to see them use RA and RS kind of in non-standard ways in 3GPP, and that's kind of where we're looking at.
Please explain that.
It's this is.
Is there a TS or like some kind
It's
of?
it's a
to?
TS. I forget the document. It's a 23 dot
Send it
something.
to the list, like if
I
you
can
see,
send
like,
it to the list, and so part of this is we're kind of looking at them using RA RS in kind of a non-standard way, and we're like, well, wait a minute, like that's kind of a bad thing.
Okay.
And so now we're trying to figure out, okay,
So
well,
if you point us the thing, right? Like, so we have a liaison,
Okay.
like going like both ways. So like
Okay.
this, like,
Right.
I can either talk to the 3GPP liaison to IETF or the other way, like, and we can like try to figure out like how we can get a message across to them, right? Like, because, and there's people who attend, like Sri, for example,
Right.
like goes to SA2, like Satoru-san, like goes to 3GPP as well. So we can probably figure something out, but if you want something
Okay.
official,
So-
I can work on it.
so probably what I'll do is I'll send a message out to the group, and if people are kind of interested in kind of just this, figuring this out, and I can report back with all the battle
So
scar
if-
stories.
If it's inside a TS, like, just point it
Yeah.
to the list. If it's a CR, then like only part of us have access. If, most of the people here like have some 3GPP accounts, and I can try using the official relationship to actually get the CRs here to get access, because 3GPP doesn't open all the CRs to everybody, right? So
Excellent.
you can, once you point that out, we can actually take a look and provide
All right.
comments.
All right.
Okay?
So,
So we have a mechanism working here where
So this
we can
is
make
this
it
is
work.
perfect. I mean, this is exactly kind of what we wanted to see, was just, if there is interest, then we can break that off. If there's, these, obviously these things are going to have issues, then at least we'll know about them before.
Yeah, and we have a history
So,
of this,
I
right? Like
appreciate
when
it.
3GPP
Yeah.
started using PMIP v6, like a bunch of us like went down to 3GPP and to CD4 and made stuff happen. So it can be made to work for sure. Okay?
Thank you.
Eric Klein. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what it is people think
Yeah.
that they can do creatively.
Yes.
I will say that to this slide, historically, yeah, RSRAs are not like a, hey, I need a new feature. Okay, here's a new feature kind of
Yeah.
protocol.
It's
And that the one way that you really could do this kind of thing in the way in which things are used today kind of violates the on-demand nature.
Yeah.
So in other words, you could say in an RA, to find some new prefix information types, to say here's a non-persistent prefix, here's a session prefix, and here's a something else prefix. But that's
You're
I get that
changing-
at attached
I-
time, and it's no longer on demand.
Yeah. I agree.
And there may be some benefit to that. Maybe it's a subscriber feature, right?
Right.
Maybe it knows from my SIM card, that I subscribe to this mobile service, and it is always available. So why not just give it to me? Why not just give me the persistent, the fixed one in the RA? That you could do, right, with a new style of option. Not reuse the PIO probably, but find a new one.
Right. So they're starting to bury some things in the options field down in the RA.
Well,
So-
there's not a whole.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of options. Oh, sorry.
No,
They have to
in
define
the
new
options, the address options field down at the bottom, not in the header.
Address. Oh, they're defining new options.
Yeah.
They do need to come to the IETF to get that done. No.
So, okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's
So,
that's
yeah.
bad. Right. I can't go into PCIO and define what it is I want to do
Okay.
with PCIO. Right. So, come on.
I'm trying.
Okay, hold on. On mic, Danny on mic. Okay, so first thing is like 3GPP should not I don't know if they are, right? Like, but they cannot squat on our code points because this is like standards action for the options, right? So they cannot just take the code points. They need to come with an IANA request, right? An IANA request is going to move to standards action, which means it's going to happen in 6-man or some IETF working group that does a standard. So it won't work, right? But they can pick a number like out of thin air and they can use it. Like there's not much we can do. We are not the internet police, right? So, but I think like 3GPP is like a friendly organization, and they are like, I'm sure like, you know, they see reason. So I don't think it's a big issue. I think we can sort this out. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding if it is, like, because I don't know the documents. So I don't know if there's a misunderstanding or not. So, but if they pick like an option code and start using it, they cannot really, right?
So in order to keep this timely, I'll go ahead and send a message out to the mailing list, and those that want to pitch in, we can figure this out. And that's basically the point of this thing, was just to get this out there and get some information from you all.
And thank you very much for doing that, like you and Danny, right? Like for actually bringing this to us, because we wouldn't know otherwise, right?
Right. So, Danny, do you want to?
Yeah.
Danny Moses. I wonder if it would be helpful to describe what they're doing right now, because it's not that they are violating anything, but they found a way to massage IETF stuff in a way that it's not in violation, but it's ugly. And we wanted to help and say, hey, this is the right way to do it. I'll give you an example. They don't use RS, but they use RA. They have their own query protocol to request stuff. So they use the protocol instead of RS to request stuff, and then they use RA to receive the info back, which is ugly. And why do they use RA? RA is not meant for provisioning of one device, right? RA is for provisioning of a. Why not the execution? Why don't they use the execution?
Because they use RA for
No, no. So my understanding is that they don't use DHCP because at the time, DHCP didn't support the allocation of prefixes. And since they wanted prefixes and not IP addresses,
so I think
they didn't support that. Okay, so let's use RA.
Danny, I think we need to move on. Yeah, just any other one, 2 more minutes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
So for what it's worth, I don't oppose this at all. The only thing, so the only thing that we need to be mindful of, and it's not, you know, so I wouldn't invoke, you know, visions of tire marks or car crashes here. There are people who've been working on similar things in 6-man prefix coloring, and this is really no different, right? It's really telling you this prefix that I'm giving you in this array has these properties. I have, it went nowhere, but perhaps because there was no sort of like compelling uses, I don't know, but I don't think this is necessarily bad. The thing is, though, I think if this is a request response model, RSRA has slightly different semantics, right?
So there's no preconceived solution here at the moment. This was just, I was just RS generically as the mechanism by which.
So I think for what it's worth, it's a lot easier to implement in some OSs, and it fits a lot better with the setsoc because arrays typically have this asynchronous notification that comes in saying you have a new address with these properties, and that fits right in with your on-demand allocation of IP addresses. Because you just send a request, and then something shows up, and they say, oh look, I've got a prefix like that, and you immediately use it. Right. So I think that's fine. The only thing is really, again, RSRA is intended for stuff that doesn't change and doesn't start to occur on a client request. So the RS is just an optimization. So it, you know, like Eric said, like if you have something if you have like 2 prefixes that are kind of always there, or 2 of them that are, one of them that's stably there and one of them that changes as you move around, you can use RA for a push notification. That's fine. And so it's just a matter of like looking into how the semantics fit, right? If it's fundamentally client request driven, then RSRA might not be the right choice. But if it isn't, then it could be.
Right. No. So I was not implying a client request and a response. This was just generically, do we want to look at broader advertisement?
I mean, you know, personally, you know, like there's some platforms that don't do DHCP6 at all, and for them it's easier to implement something that's based on RA.
So in summary, Sri's trying to wrap us up, but I'll send a message to the group, and we'll start a little side channeling, figure this out a little bit.
Last comment, Suresh.
So last comment, like, so there's like an RC 7066 that we wrote on for like how V6 is used in 3GPP hosts, like for example. So I think if there's a deviation from that, you can probably bring it up. So that's like just to answer Danny, right? So we kind of wrote down like how this is actually being used in 3GPP, but it's like a couple of years old, right? Like, so you can probably take a look and see where you start from there. Yeah, 7066. Okay, so take a look and come back to us. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Seal. Next presentation from Seal on stateless mobility functions. There's a new proposal. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hello, good morning. This is Eljan. Today I'm going to present a draft named as stateless mobility functions. Actually, that objective of this presentation is rather than saying that, okay, this is some definitive work item that DMM need to handle or take care, rather than saying that I just, to bring this, this topic here to get some more broad discussion and comments and your feedback usefully, and identify really what is it and how it can be related to what we are doing, and is there any spaces the DMM need to handle this topic. Okay, so in terms of that, and hopefully that if you just give your comments and feedback, this will be welcomes. Motivation is that the network functions are stateful, and the network function create and manages an internal state while processing network traffic, right? This state information is quite critical and to their functionality of the network functions, and it must be available when network traffic is moved from one instances to another, right? And it is also critical to support an elastic scaling of the mobility function resources. For example, so state information combined with the function components might be hard to make that the mobility operation flexible. So decoupling state from network functions might ease scaling in and out of the mobility function resource. I also could see that in the 3GPP next-gen system architecture, of course, that I know that this is TL, not TS. The stateless NF is mentioned just now. Assuming that there is a proper function model that can attach and detach and the state information with flexibility on demand, so then maybe we can think of these two mobility state management model. One is that, for example, like this, the left figure, and the mobility function components and the state, and now is the detachables. So, for example, that so for a need of to move and to change of the mobility function, state information should be also be moved, so by copying or moving operation of the state. For in case that the state information is residing in the local mobility function component. So in that case, yeah, this situation should happen, right? But another case is that we can put the state information into the externalized state entity, right? So in that case is that there are some, as you expect, that some performance-wise issue might happen that due to accessing that this internal entity to change the state whenever it's needed, right? So these and the pros and cons, but I don't say that this is only this state management model, but intuitively I could think of these two models, right? So the point is that, and such trial is now very frequently being tried in academic community to bring more flexible and more, that unlimited capability than before in the mobility management architecture and operation. So such trial need to be considered to make that the current mobility protocol operation flexible. And in the DMM is a mobility management working group, right? So if we think about the state information with the mobility function, for example, in the mobility anchor function, there will be some many state information, and the PMIP and the MIMP, and usually that also data state. But if you think that this in the 3GPP wise perspective, for example, about the status of the user session and the mobility status, the connection session, there will be a more state information, right? So, but as I said before, that if we think about this state information with the mobility anchor, if we try to go with this some approaches that, yeah, of course that I don't know that what it is, but maybe we can make more, better mobility anchor switchings or something more smooth and flexible gateway relocation support. And what about that also that function fail, that if can move this some state to another function, that mostly that also we can think of that is failover of the mobility function operations, right? So, but actually this, is, even though I just submitted one, G0 version, and but now it remains very early stages, not just, proposing, suggesting anything. So I'm going to investigate some useful use cases and in detail with existing mobility management protocols and for future mobile network requirements and the need. And then, therefore, based on the investigated use cases, we'll try to, describe what is problems and so what will be something could be more, clear. So, and so your interest and the cooperation will be welcome. And so, thanks. That was my presentation.
Okay, so I have one question. What's the difference between the stateless idea and the CPDP separation that we already discussed in this working group?
CPDP is, as you know, that it is about the separation of the control plane side from the data plane functions, right? But I think the state goes further. The state can reside in the control plane function and also data plane functions, right? Data plane function also has a state. Control plane function also has state. So separation of the control plane from the data plane, or like NFV, decoupling software instances from hardware appliance, and the state decoupling separation goes further to give more flexibility of their mobility operation.
Okay. So any questions? Yeah, Praveen. Yeah.
Praveen Bhai, Nokia. So we have tried this experiment, and what we have found is roughly like 70% of DSA can run if you actually put the state externally. The benefit of this is mostly in the scale-in scenarios, actually, more than scale-out. Because in scale-in, you don't want to have to age out in the state in that particular VM, and so you get the benefit of doing that.
Yeah.
The another use case here is really the upgrade procedure, so you can do much faster and seamless upgrade procedure.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are a couple of good things out here that
All right.
we can.
Yeah, that's right.
So Praveen, follow-up question. This is in the context of CRAN or those kind of interfaces?
This is in the context of just general NFV, that how you can actually make use of moving the state out of your gateway, and so you can use it for many different purposes, like doing the upgrades much easier, scaling, and then also if you want to run analytics, so you can have third-party software which can actually use the state much more real time as compared to coming back to your data to actual gateway. So.
Okay. Thank you, Praveen.
Thank you. Yeah.
Marco.
I see there's huge benefit in doing state externalization. That has been done, and there is implementations available on different aspects like STM controller state externalization and stateless STM controller functions.
Yeah.
So if we know about the value, so what do you think is the next step of the next step? Which means if we have use cases and a problem statement, do you think this is something that requires standardization in this group, or is it something that can be kept implementation specific?
Yeah, actually that is the very good point, that right, and that is also very one interesting point that of the people's right. But at this moment, that I was thinking that some point it can be standardized, but I don't know that. So I think that in this time that the right procedure is to investigate use cases and then extracting that some requirements, and then that will be that I can surely determine that actually it can be there are some point to be standardized, especially in TMA working group or other working groups. Okay.
This is Prakash from Cisco.
Yeah.
I really like this one. I read it.
Thank you.
And we would like to collaborate on this.
Oh,
okay.
Very good.
What I realized that the cost of stateful of the data plane is very expensive.
That's
to
right.
maintain.
Yeah.
And this is, I can call it very difficult to implement and also very expensive.
Yeah.
So I think if we can do some work in the data plane stateless,
Mhm.
not touching the control plane.
Okay.
Let the control plane be there because it's heavy in messaging, but at the same time not very complex to implement.
Yeah, that's right.
And also in terms of physical and virtual appliances, VNF and physical, because now is the way when most of the mobile gateways are moving into virtualize, and they're going to be there in physical and virtual together for quite some time. So if we can do in a stateless data plane, I think that is the way to make big architecture innovations. Yeah, and would like to collaborate.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you, Prakash. Yeah.
Dr. Matsushima, I have a question about the UID. Do you have any specific data plane technology in your mind to make?
I'm sorry again. Specific what?
Specific data plane technology.
Data plane technology.
Yeah, to make data plane stateless.
Actually, I want to include that some generic architecture, but in here is an IETF. So I'm initially thinking that this, MIP and PMIP, just the domain. Okay.
I think when you want to make things happen in real, you need to adopt some specific data plane technology. Even currently, we only have the GTP, GTP side, GR with key in IETF, so it's requires stateful operation even for the both of the control plane and data plane. But I would ask my colleague working on the BGP stuff to be able to handle GTP next hop, GTP as a next hop, so it makes some idea to make data plane status even they use GTP.
Okay.
That's one of my idea still going on.
Okay.
Idea stuff.
Okay, I will think of this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Satoru.
Just one more comment about the comment what you made. So the experiment, what we found is that even to do the control plane, actually, it's really, and it will require a lot more cycles to make it efficient in order to really reach to a certain point. If you're taking the case of data plane, it is far more complex problem. And so if we want to even look at this, I think the first probably better place will be to see that we make control plane actually, stateless, and it is more in, it is more in some sense related to how the BGP restart and all those techniques have happened where control plane dies, but your data plane is going on. Sure, I mean, data plane can be an option, but it can be based on very specific use case and, how much you need the latencies and, the requirements in data plane. So it can be based on use case that we can look at.
Okay.
Thank you, Praveen. 2 more minutes. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a lot of interest for this topic. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. So the next one is the virtual CPE deployment considerations. Yeah. Please. You have 15 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Baiju, and this is a new work item we are proposing here on virtual CPE deployment considerations. As many of you know, the concept of virtual CPE has been gaining a lot of traction in the industry, particularly among the broadband operators, and covers, generally speaking, the home broadband deployments as well as their small business solutions. So what it means is it's the process of simplifying the physical CPE devices residing at the customer premises in order to accelerate the adoption of new features and also simplify the overall the deployment aspects when it comes to the CPE-based solutions. So the objective is to use this as a field reference material and capture the key characteristics from a virtual CPE deployment perspective, and also some of the common architecture models, and do some comparison as to which one fits in depending upon the deployment requirements for various service providers. And also we are incorporating the split CPDP model on the core side from the VCP solution perspective, and considering potentially the FPC interface as the SDN interface to facilitate the control plane data plane interaction in the solution. So just touching upon the architecture models. So we have included in this draft version 3 different models. One is with the concept of having a one-to-one mapping between the physical CPE instance and the corresponding virtual CPE in the cloud. And it can be realized by using some kind of micro VM or container. And here the assumption is that both the control plane as well as the data plane aspects are covered by the corresponding VCP instance in the cloud. The second model is more based upon the broadband network gateway. Instead of having a separate VCP micro VM instance or a container per physical CPE, so we are looking at making use of the existing broadband network gateway platforms and evolve the BNG platforms to support the representational state machines corresponding to the physical CPE devices. So most of the basic features corresponding to the physical CPE can be deployed on those BNG representational states. And for additional supplementary features, we can always leverage the service function chaining along with that. So when you introduce this concept, of course, you are bringing in the policy infrastructure, which will deal with activating these virtual CPE instances on the BNG platform, as well as dealing with any kind of authentication, authorization, as well as the policy management. And the third model is similar to the previous one, except that we are splitting the BNG CPE and DP functions. And in this case, we are planning to make use of the FPC interface, potentially with some extensions brought into the FPC draft to support the additional attributes which are required for supporting the VCP solution. And we definitely have to have some discussions as far as the FPC capabilities are required for supporting this. And we are hoping potentially this can be a good use case which can leverage the FPC work which is going on. And one thing to highlight is even though we are talking about the broadband solutions and the CPE and VCP, end of day, the concept of the mobility and the PIMIP-V6 based architecture has been adopted in such deployments. There are multiple SPs in North America who have deployed the PIMIP-V6 based solution for this CPE and Anchor implementation. So I haven't seen much feedback in the community. It will be appreciated if you can start providing some feedback, and I'll be around this week and we'll be happy to discuss in person too. And looking forward to some active participation from the community in driving this and refining it into a good document.
Okay, thank you, Baiju. Any comments?
So you mentioned that you need some extensions to the current configuration draft. Yes. So have you got any feedback from the editors?
No, not yet. Actually, I think potentially we can look at as a separate standalone extension document. So I can work with the editors to actually identify those attributes and figure out whether it can be an addendum to the existing draft or it has to be a standalone doc.
Okay.
Hi, Liang from China Mobile. I have a few comments. The first one is quite generic. So can you explain a little bit of, I know my colleague is on the author list, but I'm still struggling to understand how this is related to the DMM charter. what I understand is the third model,
Yeah.
with the CPDP separation of the BNG is somehow related. But what do you see the first two model of VCPE related to this working group?
So first model is not something which we are also promoting, because this is we do see certain disadvantages when it comes to this implementation, primarily around the scale when it comes to the per instance data plane aspects. But we are documenting this just to highlight the fact that this is also out there in the field deployments. But in terms of the relevance for DMM, as you highlighted, it's the third model, which we will be spending a lot more time on promoting that aspect with split CPDP alignment. So as you rightfully pointed out, this is the one which is aligned with, very much aligned with this working group.
Okay. All right. And another is editorial change. The authorless, you might need to ask Deng Hui because he changes his affiliation. I saw his affiliation is still China Mobile, but he's not with China Mobile anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay, we'll update that
with him. Okay.
Suresh Krishnan, so Eddie had like I don't think this like the group is chartered to do this, right? Like we can probably lead like very liberally to say it could do it, but there's no milestones for this. So like if the group decides to take this up, like there's like a conversation the chairs need to have with me and the community as a whole to figure out if this is something the group wants to do.
Okay.
So right now, like it's not really in scope. Okay, so like you can work on it, and like the previous commenter said, you probably need to like take out the stuff that doesn't belong here, really, right? So 1 and 2 gone, right? And if it's just a PMIP deployment scenario, probably there's like a higher chance of this happening here than not.
Okay.
Okay.
Point well taken.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. The last one is the mobility ability negotiation. Presenters Yan Zhiwei. Okay. Negotiation. Yeah.
Yan and Lee are not in this meeting, so they asked me to present on their behalf. It's on the negotiation of the capability on the different protocols. So this is an overview that there are a lot of extensions on the mobile IP, network mobility, PMIP, all the RFC, hierarchical, fast mobile IP. There's so many of them, so it fills up the whole picture. So the question is what to do with it. Okay, I don't need to go for this, but this is a very long list, so many years of list of them. And then, so when a mobile move to a new network, so the question is that how do they need to negotiate with each other on what to do? And the negotiation is something they're talking about before you send the request to do. The mobile doesn't know. We already had work already to decide whether you need mobility or not. But given that you need mobility, what kind of mobility, which particular protocol you're going to take, and that is the order would like to raise this question, and whether we need to have add some negotiation mechanism between them. Okay, so that's the goal. And broadly speaking, you have a network-based and host-based, and but within that, there are so many different kinds of them. And then, so all these protocols are going to coexist. They are all RFC, they are going to be there. So how are they going to negotiate? So the negotiation should be basically between the network and the terminal. It happens when it accesses the network for the first time, because there's so many different networks for the first time, or when it hands over to a different network. So those are the two cases where you need a negotiation. The draft is not complete, it's raising the question. Okay, so is it something that we need to work on? the coexisting protocol. How do you manage a binding table? How do you manage signal message? How do you manage the tunnel and so on? All these have to, they're coexisting. Who is going to initiate the procedure? And then are there any principles set behind? An example could be the network supports the mobile IP, but the host doesn't support the mobile IP, so you're stuck with the network-based mobility for the host, or the network may support both, or the network supports both, and network also supports both, and these are the different categories. But within them, there are also so many different extensions that we are dealing with. Okay. And this is an example, a principle. For example, maybe you defaulted, the network defaulted to PMIP or network based, and depending on what the host can do, it will do something else. And what happens when you initially call it, and when when it hand over, while it's already using a protocol, now it hand over, the other network might support differently. So what are you going to do? And how do they, the last thing is do they need to notify the host? Does the network need to tell the host what not? So it's a capability that they are going to exchange with each other. And the next slide is that just talking about the, where are we going to put the solution? Are we going to put it in the ICMP based solution, or whether you use diameter radius or IEEE? All these are questions being raised. So the job is not a solution yet. It's just raising the question and whether it's interesting, whether there's the need to solve this problem, and if it is, then what are we going to do next? And you can, any volunteer wants to work with the others to continue the work and so on. Okay, so this is asking for the feedback. This is an example of the coexistence. Okay. Any?
Carlos Bernardo's just comment that we did something very similar to this back in 2013. There is a paper where we compare different mobility options and how they could be combined. So I don't know if the authors look at that, but it may be worth.
I'm not the author, so I do not know. But it's in the paper, right? I will take that note.
Yeah, Carlos,
but it's not,
send the paper link to the list.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Is the paper
reference in the draft note?
Oh, reference. Okay,
It's
thank
not
you.
in the
Thank you.
reference. No, I will send the paper, so maybe the authors can take a look at that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you can also give some suggestion what to do, right? So the paper had the solution already, right?
So one comment is like, there a few years back, there used to be something called MNAR interface, mobile network access router interface, MNAR interface. So that essentially, it was intended for a mobile node to negotiate, the protocols and some of these things. So are you thinking about defining a new interface between the mobile node and the network, or did I misunderstand it?
It's not an interface, it's just the new messages. So what was already done again?
There was a working group document called MNAR interface. Julian wrote it, but you can take a look at it.
So if there's an existing interface, they can just add a message to it, is that right?
It's a new interface. It's a reference interface, but there was no protocol standardized, but it was a reference interface, but for whatever reasons that work didn't, even though it was a working group document, it did not move forward. I have a feeling, whatever you're thinking is, somewhat, overlaps with that work. I suggest, you may want to take a look at that work.
Okay, so it's good to look at the different options, and then what do we do next? Come back again later to...
Yeah, let the working group provide some feedback and...
get some feedback, okay. So we should continue to look at it, right?
It's up to the working group. I think,
yes.
If there is interest, yes, but I do not know.
So, Christian, just a clarification. This is not a working group document in this one. It was in NetLMM 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I think she didn't mention it, so it's not like continue looking at it. If you want to look at it, it's like new thing here to bring it up, okay? What she was mentioning is there's been a lot of work that has been done before, and you can take a look at it to see where it went. That was the point. Like, there is no working group document in this working group. Does that make sense? There's a
Yes.
working group document in NetLMM, which was like grandfather of this working group or whatever, right? Something like that. So Sri can send a pointer, or I can send a pointer to the list with the draft, right? But the last version of the draft was 10 years ago.
Okay.
From 2008, I think, sometime around that. So I can send a pointer to that, look at it and see, like, you know, if you want to revive it and like, continue working on it, that's one thing. But I think what Sri is saying is like reuse the work that has been done before, because there's a lot of tricky problems that are like resolved, and there's still a lot more remain even in that thing. So like it kind of like lost interest because it is very difficult. So at least reuse the things that have been done before.
Yeah, there are lots of new protocols in 10 years. Okay. The author might have read them already. I don't know, but so I'll tell the authors to study whatever was before, and then propose and bring it to discussion again next time. Anyone interested to join the authors in the work are welcome.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. So we have one final topic. This is from Fred. This was not on the agenda, but last minute because we have time. So let's see if I can open that up. Did you send the slides?
Did I send them to you? You have them? Sri S. Gundab?
Yeah, yeah.
SS
Got it.
Okay. Oh. So I only want to take 5 minutes on this subject, but this is to inform the community about some efforts that are going on in what's known as the International Civil Aviation Organization. I've written a draft called a simple BGP-based mobile routing system for the aeronautical telecommunications network. So let me give some background on this. The International Civil Aviation Organization is building an IP-based networking system for worldwide air traffic management. It's developing what's called the Aeronautical Telecommunications Network with Internet Protocol Services, or ATN-IPS. It's underdeveloped by the ICAO Working Group I group. It's going to be IPv6 and mobility capable, and it needs to accommodate aircraft that have a multiple variety of data links, for example, SATCOM, LDACs, VHF, and others. Now, this is going to be telling how civil aviation is going to do IP-based networking in the future. So it's pretty big for the flying public. All of your airplanes that you're going to be flying on are going to be using this system eventually. GoGo is a really good question, whether that's going to be one of the links that carries this or not, because GoGo is open to it's in the passenger domain. So do we want to put the air traffic management domain over to GoGo as well? It's a good question. Maybe that's not the question you were asking though. Okay. So the mobility subgroup is currently discussing mobility alternatives for the ATN-IPS. They're looking at PMIP, a system they call ground-based LISP, and this new document that I've written called the BGP-based overlay, which is the subject of this document. The title is a simple BGP-based mobile routing system for the aeronautical telecommunications network. It's based on a BGP overlay network that does not interact with the global public internet BGP routing system. All it does is carries mobile network prefixes. It does not carry the full internet routing table. It's based on a hub and spokes arrangement where we have stub autonomous system border routers in the data link provider subnetworks and core autonomous system border routers in the center of the network. And again, the stub ASBRs advertise and withdraw airplane mobile network prefixes. And the core ASBRs are in a hub autonomous system. They forward packets between stub autonomous system border routers. Route optimization is included, that it removes the CSBRs from the path. And that's all I wanted to really get to today. Here's a pointer to the draft. It had some of its origins in earlier publications of mine, including RC 6179. And it's going to be presented at the ICAO Working Group Mobility Subgroup in Montreal the week of May 15th. So that's all I wanted to get to today. Thank you.
Okay, a quick question. The group you just described is also doing standard?
They're doing the standard. The standard is called ICAO 9896, which is the standard for ATN IPS services. It's very IETF centric, but it's their own set of specifications in that community.
Any questions for Fred?
Eric Klein. I haven't had a chance to read the document, but how are the prefixes allocated to? These are prefixes that will be actually allocated to each individual plane?
That's right. Each plane, they're talking about each plane getting a /56. And that /56 goes with that plane wherever the plane travels to. And it's used over whatever data link the plane happens to be using at that time, whether it be a satellite link or a VHF link or whatever. So that
every new data link, data uplink that it moves to, it needs to, it keeps its own prefix with it.
it keeps its own prefix wherever it moves. Yes.
It needs to register or re-register.
Yeah. So there's some lower level signaling that goes on to map the static prefix that it has with the underlying data link address that it's using at the current time.
And the provisioning on the per plane basis happens somewhere else, like at the carrier, at the operator, in the factory essentially. Well,
so what happens is ICAO gets what's called a mobility service prefix, and that would be like a /32 or something very small like that, so a small short prefix. And ICAO will build a /56 prefix based on the airplane serial number. So you get the mobility service prefix concatenated with the airplane serial number, gives you the /56.
Oh, so all planes will come out of the same /32?
Yes.
It's not going to be like United has its prefix and ANA and has its prefix and so on?
Well, that's a good question because there's two different domains. There's the air traffic control domain, which is more of a governing type function, and then there's the airline operations domain. And what they've been talking about is the air traffic control domain where you'll have a single /32. But if you look at the different airlines, United and Alaska or whatever, whether they would use that /32 or would get their own, I think has not been decided yet.
Because otherwise it means like if I wanted to attack all planes everywhere, I know I need to like start to attack this /32.
Well, then comes the question as to whether this is going to be gatewayed onto the internet or not, or whether it's going to stay as its own little internet on its own.
Have they already received a /32 from some RIR?
That's been discussed over and over again in the meetings. I do not believe they've gotten that prefix yet. And I use /32 as an example. They might be going for something shorter, like a /30 or a /28 or something like that.
Sure. But the question sort of still stands. Like, which RIR are they getting as prefix from?
It comes up in every one of their meetings. They meet 3 times a year, and the same topic comes up every year. And it's not decided yet.
So we could have some disconnected portion of the. We will have 25 dot or whatever it is, right? A disconnected portion of the network.
Possibly, but it depends on whether you want to actually gateway this thing onto the global public IPv6 internet or not.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they decide.
Safety and reliability are very important factors. So avoiding DOS attacks that might come from the internet is something you really want to watch out for.
Fascinating. Thank you.
So Krishnan, so I haven't read the draft. Like I didn't know it was going to be presented. So. One thing I'm concerned about, like, and it's like from past experience, right? So like knowing about connection, right? Like from Boeing, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things it caused was like large impact on the global routing table, right? So that's probably something you need to watch out for on this. So if this prefix is getting advertised and withdrawn like multiple times when a plane crosses over somewhere, then it's probably not going to fly. Like, no pun intended, but
there's actually quite a bit of discussion about that in the draft. And again, I'm sorry it wasn't announced in time, but this is absolutely not that connection by Boeing. And the draft is very careful to explain how it differs. Okay. This system carries only the mobile network prefixes, and they only get updated occasionally. Now, I've modeled this in network emulations. I've modeled a single BGP router handling 1 million mobile network prefixes. And there's probably not going to be 1 million planes in service anytime soon. And this is with prefix withdrawals and updates going on all the time that you can handle at least 1 million. And that's on a lightweight virtual machine. It's not even on a Cisco router.
What is it? Is it like Nemo-like or what is it like? Is it
this is talking about the inter-autonomous system mobility. But there's also an intra-autonomous system mobility that would be handled by something like a Nemo or my system, which is called Arrow, or possibly PMIX v6. So two levels, intra-domain mobility, which would be the things we've been talking about here, and inter-domain mobility, which is what this does.
Okay.
So.
So, okay, so I think like you should probably also run this, like if there's like inter-domain stuff, you should probably run it by like IDR or somewhere else as well. Like, so probably ask for a slot or just announce the draft there and like, run it by them. Just make sure like, like we're not breaking some major stuff, right? So
what would you think about putting in some of the routing working groups, like routing working group? Or
IDR would be probably the best bet to take a look at it. Or like if you want to get a dispatch like somewhere like routing working group or something. So I could probably, I think you should talk to Alia. Like I think that would be like Alia or Alvaro, or like one of the routing areas would be a good bet.
Okay.
Okay. So or I can just point them to this draft and say, hey guys, like, you want to like, point out like that.
That'd be great if you wanted to do that for me.
So just send me an email and I'll do that. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Eric Flanagan. I had a quick, Control F find for the substring auth to see if there was any sort of authentication of the BGP stuff. Are you intending to have some authentication mechanism or use the secure RPKI kind of stuff? Or
what I was thinking was between the BGP routers, you would have either an IPsec tunnel, or you would have a private link between the BGP core routers and stub ASBRs. So you'd be protected from eavesdropping and spoofing and authentication by either IPsec over the internet or by a physical, separated line.
does the plane need to participate in this BGP?
No,
announcement?
no, that's absolutely not, doesn't happen.
Okay.
The plane does an intra-autonomous system signaling, and that might be based on something like Nemo, it might be based on Arrow, it might be based on PMP6.
I see.
Right. But the plane does not do any BGP updates. It's not an autonomous system.
So the thing that it talks to on the ground or on the satellite or that's responsible for the BGP updates.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay,
Any more comments? Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Fred. That's it, right? Yeah, okay, that's it. That ends all the presentations. Thank you so much. Can we get the blue sheets, please? Good. Blue sheets. Hey. Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you. So you're local, right?
Yeah.
Okay.